friends, welcome to Drawing Conversation. I am your dedicated nerd host and artist, Danny Fisher. And today we're going to be drawing the origin as well as the original classes and races of Dungeons & Dragons. Let's get going. Now, with me today as my subject matter expert on Dungeons & Dragons is Thomas Roberts from Heart of Adventure podcast. It is an amazing D&D podcast. Please check out the links in the description below. But hey, Thomas, how are you doing?
It's been a good day. Had to do a lot of cleaning this morning, but I'm doing great. Big fan of D&D.
Man, D&D's the best. Cleaning sucks, but D&D's great.
So you want to talk history, huh?
Absolutely. So in your opinion, if someone were to ask you for one thing, what is D&D? What is D&D?
It is a tabletop role-playing game, which is kind of the overall idea. But what I like to say is it is a collaborative storytelling adventure with rules to guide the play. So you are at the table to tell a story as a group, whether that be in combat or out of combat. Rules are there to ensure that, I can't cast a 20th level spell, which doesn't exist as a first level character, because I just want to do that.
History about Dungeons & Dragons.
There is an interesting history to D&D, but it is a rich and a fun one. So it starts out Gen Con 1. The first Gen Con. Gary Gygax goes and plays a game called Siege of Bodenberg. It's a tactical, army-based, military sim game.
Controlling entire
armies. It's using like 40mm minis, the classic size, everything, and after that, he meets a guy called Jeff Perrin, who had created a medieval set of rules based on that. So instead of, kind of the more modern side, it goes to medieval. Gygax and Perrin work together, and they start on writing Chainmail, which is that medieval rule set, but it's an official rule book. So it's a medieval army tactical war game. It then moves on to Gygax meets a guy called Dave Arneson, who has taken Chainmail and made it for individual characters. And he's added in things like XP, leveling, armor class, HP, stuff like that for individual characters rather than entire armies. That's kind of what Chainmail became. And Gygax falls in love with this idea. He writes a fantasy supplement for it that adds some magic to the army side of it. But eventually, Arneson, Gygax, and a guy called Don Kay, who helps Gygax form what eventually becomes Tactical Studies Rules, which is the publishing company that created D&D. And this is a fun fact, they had $2,400. That was what they started out with. That's what they ended up coming up with and compiling to start their company.
What a rags to riches story.
They created 1,000 copies of the original book in 1974, sold them for $10 each, with $350 on top if you wanted the set of dice that came with it. They sold all of them in 10 months, so not the quickest selling process, but eventually they ended up doing another 1,000, sold them in 6 months, and so on and so forth. It got faster and faster. In 1977, Advanced D&D was created, which was essentially just like, here's some extra rules, here's some corrections that we've gotten from playtesting, and yada, yada, yada. 1989, second edition was created, and then 1997, Tactical Studies Rules had created so many other tabletop games. There was a Mars role-playing game, there were other medieval ones, there was modern stuff, and they weren't doing so great because people were kind of falling off of it. There was the Satanic Panic, people were calling it, the death of children.
The work of the devil.
The work of the devil, and things were going horribly. So in 1997, they were nearly bankrupt. And they were bought out by Wizards of the Coast. For a couple years, they created content under the name TSR. They wanted TSR to still exist, still be a thing. And then in 2000, third edition was released by Wizards of the Coast, not by TSR, with collaboration, of course, by the people within it, including Gygax. But that was when kind of D&D really shot back up into the world. Third edition was the thing. Third edition is what spawned Pathfinder. It's really what spawned the D20 system, this role-playing RPG system based around a 20-sided dice to determine outcomes.
And that became the weapon of the nerd.
Exactly. It's not too complicated like 100-sided dice. It's not too simple like just throwing around some 6-sided dice. You have more possibilities, more room for failure, more room for success. In 2008, just after Gygax passed away, he passed away in March of 2008, long may he reign. In June of that year, Wizards of the Coast released 4th edition. After some feedback from players of the community, they wanted a more intuitive, streamlined, combat-oriented form of the game. And this is where a lot of people got turned off from D&D, because it went back to its roots of a war game. and things became so combat oriented that people were just like, well, where's the storytelling? Where's this going? And so in 2012, 5th edition was released, and it has since been a monster in the public eye.
Literally a monster. And it's really the biggest it's ever been. And I think it's not only because 5th edition made it so much fun that you could just jump in, you could have a mature character, you didn't have to quote unquote level grind as much as you did in 3rd or 4th. You could pop in and you could just start having so much fun right away.
Well, what was great is when they released it, of course they released it with the 3 core rule, or 3 core books, which started with 2nd edition. There was the Monster Manual, the Dungeon Master's Guide, and the Player's Handbook. And those 3 books set the game up to be successful. The Dungeon Master's Guide said, hey, if you want to hand out levels as milestones rather than XP, go for it. If they do something really cool, give them a level. Don't just say, hey, you got 20 XP because you killed 2 goblins. Like, make the story that you want to play. It was very novice-oriented. It was for people that didn't play TTRPGs to get into the space, make a character, and just start playing.
And it's going bigger and better than ever. Now, we have to talk a little bit about the in-game lore and what people bring in. And you can't talk about Dungeons and Dragons without talking about dragons.
Yeah, of course.
Like for me, the idea of a dragon really existing is just insane.
And I mean, they're all over fantasy, period. I mean, like, Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, has Smaug, the classic evil, deep voice Benedict Cumberbatch, you know, sitting on top of a massive pile of gold, with dwarves coming in trying to steal his gold from him, or his gold, their gold, whose is it? But dragons are, in my opinion, the terror of the skies. That's what's so great about them, you know? Chromatic dragons sometimes show up as halflings that walk around all nicely until they transform into a dragon right in front of you, or chromatic dragons fly from above, destroying towns, and it's just a matter of how your DM wants to tell the story.
And dragons, moreover than that, it's because there are so many different types of dragons, and don't want to get too nerdy into it, but at the core, they are the embodiment of magic. At least that's how they've always been presented to me. That you can't set the landscape.
I mean, sometimes even magic casters themselves. You know, normally we don't think of dragons as these things that cast out spells, but when you're that old, you know, thousands of years old, and you can turn into a mortal, like you can shapeshift into humanoids as they can, you learn some stuff. You pick up on these things. You become a master of what's around you. And if you're going to go and fight an ancient dragon, you better be prepared for him to know every move you're about to take.
Speaking of fighting, I love, and I have to go back to the artists from Jeff Easley, Larry Elmore, Keith Parkins, Caldwell, Brom. I mean, these artists shaped what D&D looks like, but moreover, what fantasy looks like.
Oh, absolutely.
It just pulled me in. They always painted the dragon kind of at ground level fighting the fighting man. But in truth, a dragon's not going to come down on ground level and let you get in striking range. This dragon, for people to know, dragons, obviously they're immune to magic, but they're just going to take into flight and cast spells from the sky and just ruin your day.
It's horrible.
And just crush you. It is just not...
A good DM knows how to play tactically with their monsters. And one of the scarier monsters to play tactically with is a beholder. Beholders are frightening.
And speaking of beholders, man, I had no idea until I did a little research how crazy beholders are.
Oh, okay. So, from the Far Realm, which the Far Realm is basically just outer space. The edges of space that get so wonky and weird that things just appear from them.
Yes!
They're these floating eyes with large mouths and then these tentacles that end in eyes. It's super, super creepy to look at. But what's even crazier, and I love this, is we as players and dungeon masters can't know about beholders. When you're playing them, you technically have to roll on a table to see which eye ray they decide to use.
Oh, yeah.
They're so misunderstandable, so ununderstandable, so complex that we, even as DMs, can't know what they do. They themselves are embodiments of paranoia. They fear every second of their lives that they'll be dead the next. And
paranoia and narcissism.
Exactly, like Xanathar is a classic example
of this. Sir.
The beholder, he's got his goldfish pet who he relates to on a very, very intense level. This goldfish stuck in a little bowl, he feels like that all the time. But when a beholder dreams, have you heard about this?
Keep going, yes sir.
When a beholder dreams, when they dream, if they ever go to sleep, those dreams are so vivid and sometimes nightmarish that they can become reality around them. They can bend the space and time, and then they wake up and there's an actual another beholder behind them that they have to then kill. It's terrifying.
And each of them believe that they are the perfect image, the perfect being of their god that they worship.
They're the center of the universe.
And everyone else, or every other beholder, is a knockoff.
Oh, yeah.
That must be obliterated.
Oh, yeah. And everything else might be real, might be fake. Needs to be thought about. Needs to be maybe destroyed. It's paranoia, it's fear, but that's what makes them so terrifying, is because you never know what their next move is going to be. They might be on your side one moment, and then the next they decide, nope, I'm going to kill you. And that's what's so great.
And just to give a little reference, a beholder floating, if you can imagine, a floating head, 10 eye stalk tentacles that each have their own, from charm to death to disintegrate to paralyze to freeze
Petrify,
to
telekinesis.
sometimes fire, sometimes ice.
They make magic, period.
Magic in general.
Yeah.
They can create spheres to shut down magic.
Yeah, their main eye is an anti-magic cone, which can sometimes be to their detriment because their eye rays are magical. So sometimes they have to shut their own main eye to play tactically in the space. So, on to our next monster. We fought a beholder on our pirate ship, the Boar's End. We have some goblins on our pirate ship.
Yes, sir.
They're friends, they're nice, but they run around. But I love goblins.
And goblins, that's the thing with goblins is, if at some point you don't run into goblins on your D&D campaign,
they're either
whether
the
it's
first or second monster you fight.
Yes, either a friend or foe.
Yeah.
You know, if you don't, then you're not playing D&D.
Yeah.
Like, you're just not.
Either you fight goblins or you fight bandits first. It's that. I mean, unless your DM is done with tropes and wants to do something different, you're going to fight goblins first. But they're so great. They're so conniving, quick. You know, they'll run around you. They'll pickpocket you so that you can't use your cool magic knife that you just got. They'll wave it around your face, not know how to use it, and then end up killing themselves with it anyways.
1, you could probably deal with. 2, maybe even 3, but goblins don't go anywhere.
No.
Unless they're in groups.
20, 30 goblins rushing out of a cave when you saw one and you thought this will be easy. Oh, Lord, you better run.
They are so... It's all about the traps. You think, you know what?
Yeah.
You're right. I can just run in there and take out that one who stole something from me.
12 rocks fly on your face.
Exactly. And it's always a trap. It is always scheming. And I always felt that the goblin appeals to a good game master, a dungeon master's trickster side.
Yeah.
Like, how much do I want to screw with my party?
Yeah, how deep do I want to make this pit trap? How far do I want the players to have to slide on oil before they fall into this bed of stones? What is it? Like, they're geniuses in their own right.
Yes.
And they're idiots at the same time. They have their moments. They enter these fugue states of conniving, and then they go back to being, oh, we're just going to be crazy and weird. And that's what's so great.
I love goblins. You have to incorporate them. You have to. And obviously, going through, I mean, they just kept expounding from orcs to... You run into minotaurs, you could run into...
Bugbears.
Cyclops, owl bears. You could run...
Yep.
There's so many. But for me, and I don't know what it is about goblins, you have to have them.
Mm-hmm. There's so many monsters you could fight, but I think if you were to pick 3 to really focus in on, beholders, dragons, goblins are your
Tropes.
big D&D tropes. They are the ones.
Let's talk about some of the classic character and races builds.
Let's talk about the party. So, original D&D was created with 3 classes. The fighting man,
Yes.
the magic user, and the cleric. Fighting man being a master of martial arts. Not necessarily kung fu, maybe it is kung fu.
Maybe.
But it could also be hand-to-hand combat in terms of just raw punches. It could be swords. He could be a knight. He could be a ranger. It was anything that you were so good with fighting that that's just what you did. The cleric was someone who prayed so hard that they got magic. They fight with holy weapons. They're healers. They're protectors, but not necessarily. They could be grave clerics. They could be people who bring upon the death of others because that's what their god tells them to do. And then there's magic users, wizards, sorcerers.
And I always
warlocks,
felt that every
bards.
party needed the magic user.
Yeah, especially magic user. I mean, they're so utilitarian. Stuff like shields, stuff like magic missiles, stuff like, I mean, Tensor's floating disc, Liamon's tiny hut. That's what I love about wizards is they always name spells after themselves.
And why not? If you made up something good, just do it.
Melf's acid arrow. It's like, if you created this awesome spell, yeah, I'm gonna let everybody know. It's like copywriting something, or it's like discovering a new plant. I'm gonna name it after myself.
But moreover than that, I think the wizard, you need the team's smart guy.
Yep.
You need someone who's like, oh, I've come across these runes, I've seen this before, I'm going to tell
That's
you
a
how this
fire
works.
trap.
Yes, we're going to steer clear from that.
Yeah. I love wizards because they're so different to all the other classes because they think about the battlefield in a very different way.
Absolutely.
It's
and
great.
and unfortunately, wizards are squishy. At the beginning.
Yes.
Beginning. It's not, and I don't know if it was by design, if Gygax had that in mind because he just couldn't get his head around anyone not wanting to play the fighting man.
Yeah.
You know, but wizards are squishy, and it's going to take you a
it's a
while.
game balance thing, right? Your fighting
Yeah.
man is your tank. Your cleric is your healer. They're supposed to be a little bit more sturdy so that your healer isn't the first thing to fall in battle. But the wizard is so utilitarian that people are going to target them so that they don't get fireballed at the start of combat. I mean, it makes sense, but that's the whole point of having a fighting man, is to protect your wizard. And your cleric is to protect your fighting man, and your wizard is to protect your cleric. It's a circle of protection, but also at the same time, kill everything before they can kill us.
Beautiful. I love it. Let's talk about the fighting man. When I drew this, I tried to channel my inner Conan the Barbarian.
Oh, yes.
Or the prototypical.
I literally wrote that down in my notes. Conan the Barbarian is the fighting man.
Absolutely. Like, come into a room, knows that they're the toughest guy in there. Even if they don't, they're going to walk with the swagger that they're the toughest guy in the room. And he's going to be your classic tank. Like, he's going to just wreck everything.
Outnumbered, outgunned, he's still going to go down fighting. He'll get a hit out on every single enemy that he can. He'll take out everything that he can. I mean, it's a fight.
And every party needs that. Every party needs that quote-unquote tank to go in there and be the center of attention.
But then again, the classic fighting man doesn't necessarily have to be the tank, like we said. It could be a ranger. It could be someone who is so good with weapons at range that they don't need to get in the fray. They can stay at the back. An archer is a very good example of a ranged fighting man, which eventually became a class all on its own, that also learned magic. They kind of became a druid-ish.
And with the archer, let's talk about, I guess, that druid-ish archer class. I mean, I felt that you always had to have someone that blended, that you could enfold magic into this character.
Yeah.
But also had a range and could take some damage.
Yeah. Hunter's Mark, Lightning Arrow, Fire Arrow, Zephyr Strike, Land Stride. The Rangers are, in my opinion, the survivalists.
Yes.
They literally have abilities in 5th edition that state you can just find food. You can go through the wilderness at stealth, full speed. You can track people if they are marked, period. They are the trackers. They're the hunters. If they know about their prey, they will find it. They will take it out. They will end it.
And for me, that character always was the elf, because they can live so long that they've learned all these things. How to track, how to find.
I mean, Legolas in Lord of the Rings is the perfect example of that. Just the ultimate archer fighter. Pinpoint from 100 yards away, arrow, just no problem.
And if you live that long, even if you suck at it, you practice 10 hours a day, you're going to be amazing after 1,000
hours.
Exactly. Yeah. You're going to get there faster, sooner.
Yeah.
I guess you'll get there before your body fails.
Well, because elves don't even hit adulthood until they're in their first century. They're long living, and it's similar with dwarves. Dwarves live a very long time, too.
So then we have to come to the dwarf. I love the dwarf. And as D&D went on, you had subclasses from like mountain dwarves to hill dwarves. But I always loved the tank dwarf.
Yeah.
Covered in armor, always have night vision.
Half his body weight in beard. And
necessity.
And in beer.
Now, dude, this is the weird thing. In D&D, do female dwarves look like male dwarves, as in Terry Pratchett's universe?
Yeah, they can. It depends on your DM. But in my opinion, I think female dwarves absolutely grow beards. They can shave them if they want. But I think that they have a lot of facial hair. They have very long eyebrows. They have very long hair. All of their hair grows very long. Dwarves are hairy creatures.
That is hilarious. I thought that was strictly a Terry Pratchett invention.
Yeah. But I mean, even in the lore, dwarves are carved of stone. They are creatures of the mountain. And what I love about it is in 5th edition, they have poison resistance because they are built to be resistant to things of the earth, to include ale. Because drinking ale to the point of drunkenness is a poison, right? It's a poison in your body.
So you're constantly poisoning yourself. So of course you're going to be resistant.
Yeah, you're resistant to it.
Of course.
Because they're so good at it.
Well, dwarves, for me, are also extremely versatile characters. You could be the tank in the room, throwing down your huge double-sided axe, taking all types of damage. But you could also learn amazing spells. Spells on par with any magic user. And I think they have a little bit of advantage because they can throw magic, but then they're also so physically tough to take that damage that they almost, I don't know, I almost felt like they had a little bit of an unfair advantage except for speed. But your character doesn't have that issue, does he?
Thoradin is a monk and a barbarian, which both get movement speed increases. So he has 45 base movement speed now.
That is nuts. I can't imagine seeing a dwarf move that fast. It would just be hilarious.
With Step of the Wind, which is a monk ability, I can dash as a bonus action. So in one turn, I can go 135 feet, which is far for a dwarf.
Super safe.
Very dangerous across short distances.
Oh, yes, exactly.
That's what I love about dwarves, is that they know their weaknesses and they love to tell jokes about them.
And then that brings us to the Hobbit. I mean,
halfling.
Thank you.
Tolkien will get on to you about that.
You gotta watch it.
You gotta watch it. Halflings are, burrowing hill folk. They live simple lives. They wouldn't necessarily prefer to adventure, but sometimes you'll find one that does. And they're so small, sometimes they get missed by enemies. They don't get seen. They can hide behind their allies. They're so nimble and quick. But what I love about halflings is, and this comes from the Lord of the Rings side of things, is they are naturally lucky. We see that in Bilbo. We see that in the story of bringing the ring to Mount Doom. It's this story of they just happened to not get seen. They just happened to cross the river in time. They just happened to do this or that. So in 5th edition, they literally have an ability called Lucky, where if you roll a natural 1, you can just roll it again.
It's like, we didn't see that. That was nothing.
It can be a 1 again the second time, and that sucks. But if you roll it once, you can roll it again. If you fail so bad, luck is on your side. It might not be that way. And that's, I think, stems from Tolkien.
And I always thought, for my parties, if we're going to have a halfling, I don't want the halfling who enjoys bubble baths on my party. I'm sorry. I want the halfling that has that sense of adventure, that wants to get out in the world and has no problem stabbing a goblin in the back real quick.
I think halflings make perfect rogues, mostly because as a rogue you don't want to get seen, and halflings are so unnoticeable. Sometimes they just go by, and they're so quick too. I mean, sure, they have smaller legs, so they have a shorter movement speed in 5th edition, but it can be overcome, and there are feats that you can take to increase movement speed, stuff like that. But halflings are great.
Every party needs luck.
Yeah.
It needs that person who's just lucky enough
to just get it done in the last second.
Exactly. It's like
end of the battle, everybody's down, halfling's the last one up, one enemy left, rolls a natural 1 on the attack, turns into a crit 20, stabs him right in the back, and ends the fight.
We all get out alive.
It's great, and that's the beauty of D&D is you never know what's going to happen next session. You never know what's going to happen next roll, and it's always so unpredictable, so fun, so fresh, and that's what's so great about it.
D&D encapsulates for me the idea of letting your imagination go wherever it wants. And that's what I think why D&D will be popular forever.
Absolutely. Whether it's 6th edition, 20th edition, or 5th edition.
Oh man.
It's always going to be that popular force that it is.
Folks, thank you so much for watching. Now I want to give a huge thank you to Thomas Roberts over at Heart of Adventure podcast for lending his time in making this episode. Folks, if you're looking for an amazing D&D podcast, please do yourself a favor. Check the links in the description below. It is an amazing podcast. You will not be let down. And as always, please subscribe, like, turn those notifications, but most importantly, leave a comment below and let me know how I'm doing, and I will talk to you again soon.